Well, welcome everybody as we
Yes.
part two of an ongoing series, sort of a new semester, if you want to call it that. Of course, in Rabbinic's response to reform, and we welcome our most prolific speaker on Zoom. Dr. Shapiro has been giving classes since 2008. We started, I forget the exact year, and I do recommend. I mentioned before, really, literally a couple hundred talks on the widest range of great rabbinic figures you can think of over the last couple hundred years. That's what we were doing until March of 2020. And so you got lots to listen to back up. And then for the last 2 years, of course, a series of according his book and Shaul Lieberman, and now on the rabbinic response to reform. So it's a pleasure to welcome back and reintroduce Dr. Marc Shapiro. And we look forward to, as always, interesting classes and the wealth of information. And Bakasha, Dr. Marc, it's all yours.
Oh, thank you. And I actually, in Florida at the hotel, I met some people who've been listening to the classes. And that was the first time I met them, but none of our regulars were there. So I hope everyone had a very good Pesach. It's April 25th. And I'm not going to say what day of the Omer because I haven't yet said it, but yesterday was the, today was the 9th. So I can say it later with a bracha. I never was able to finish it until I started getting these texts that come in around 9 p.m. I get these texts on my phone from 2 different places, and that's a great invention. But I welcome you to this new semester, all our old friends, and if we have some new ones, I just want to point out a few things because I mentioned it. Those who were with us a while ago, we dealt with the Mir Yeshiva. My article finally appeared. Happy to send it to anyone. Just appeared last week, the Mir Yeshiva and its Shanghai Sojourn. If you want the sources for everything we spoke about, it's in this book, China and Ashkenazic Jewry, Transcultural Encounters. It was a wonderful conference gathering in China. Don't know if they'll ever let us back into China, so I'll have those fond memories. Also, at the same time, basically, this appeared. I mentioned it. I can send this to anyone as well. My piece, which they asked me to write, the retrospective of Nathan Kamenetsky's Making of a Gadol. What else do I want to show you? Okay, a few other things before we start. In the last class, I have to clarify something. I was speaking about Jose Faur. We was talking about Tradition, the magazine, right at the end of the class, and I mentioned that in the new issue, not the new issue, and recently they've even had at least one or maybe 2 authors who are not Orthodox, and then I said that takes us back to the days of Walter Wurzburger, that he was liberal. And I mentioned they published Jose Faur. I didn't mean to imply that Jose Faur was not what we would call Orthodox. However, he did teach at the seminary, and that's why, here's the article from 1968. Look how it is described. A distinguished rabbinical scholar. Usually you have the biography, it'll say, teaches at the University of Minnesota, this and that, but they couldn't say actually where Faur taught, so they leave it like that. I thought that was interesting, but no, I didn't mean to imply anything about Rabbi Faur not being Orthodox, but he, as we spoke about in the Lieberman classes, the same issue with Shaul Lieberman applied to Faur. That is where he was teaching. Because we mentioned Rabbi Wein's book, I don't need to give any more examples of things I found which need corrections, but I did mention this individual, Rabbi David Cohen, the Nazir. We had classes on him. You can see Torah in Motion. So here you have a number of pictures of him. I think we did 3 classes on him. And I pointed out that Rabbi Wein was incorrect in saying that he only becomes religious, not to forget about being a Nazir, religious, when he meets Rav Kook. Not true at all. In fact, he was a Nazir before he met Rav Kook. Very holy man, worth investigation of who he is. Now, what I wanted to mention last week, and I just forgot because everyone has this question, so I'll say now is, what did he do for the Arbacosos? Everyone always asks me, what did he do? Because you need to have 4 cups of wine. If not wine, you need to have grape juice. I too was interested in this, and I'm holding a copy in my hand right now of an email I sent, and the reply I sent to the daughter-in-law of the Nazir, the wife of Rav Yashiv Cohen, who was chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. He himself was a Nazir until he was 16 years old. And by the way, the Nazir of Jerusalem, it wasn't an official Nazirut. That is, he never actually took an oath. He just acted as a Nazir. Naomi Cohen, who the daughter of Rabbi Herbert, was it Herbert Goldstein? As I recall, yeah, Herbert Goldstein. She just passed away very recently, within the last year. So I asked her, and she said as follows. Away. I wasn't sure if at the time, before I investigated him, I thought maybe he's one of these people that at least on the Seder night, he'll drink wine, but no. She said, my father-in-law did not drink wine on the Seder night. What he used was apple wine. And let me show you what's going on here. What is apple wine? It says in Mishnah Nedarim, chapter 6, verse 9, Hanoder bin Hayayin, if you vow that you're not going to drink wine, mutar beyein tapuchim, you can drink apple wine. So what this shows us, as Dr. Cohen mentions, is that yayin tapuchim is regarded in common parlance as wine. And the Gemara has to explain that because when people say yayin, they mean grape wine, that yain tapuchim is not included, but fundamentally it is considered wine. That's why the Gemara needs to say it, it has the status of wine for various purposes, including drinking it on for the Seder. And she also points out that when kosher wine was unavailable, there were yotzei with mead, which is a drink that's distilled from honey. So the Nazir, that's what he drank. And the last thing I want to point out to you, and then I don't have anything else. You're going to have to send me more things to comment. I guess after tonight's class, you will. I investigated the whole Hecha Kedusha thing, and I learned something which I did not know. If you recall, we had this discussion, what's preferable in the Hecha Kedusha? Is it preferable to daven together with the Chazan from the beginning, and then you go into Kedusha, or to wait, let the Cohen do Kedusha, and then you start your Shemona Esrei? And we know what the Rav Soloveitchik's approach was, that you're supposed to start together with the Chazan. And I also called your attention to the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, Ramosha Isserles, that's in Orach Chaim Kuf Chav Daled, where he says, if you're afraid that time is going to pass, that's what it's Hecha Kedusha, you should start davening immediately. The Kol Ram together with the Chazan. Also in 109.2, he says the same thing, that if the time is short, or Kedei Lismoch Gula Tefillah, you should do this in Shachris. If you ever in Shachris, let's say they have to do the Hecha Kedusha, what you need to do in Shachris is you need to always start together with the Chazan, because otherwise you're not being somech geula tefillah. If you sit and listen to them and then you start after Kedusha. However, when you look at 109.2, which I didn't realize at first, when it comes to Mincha, and that's when we do the Hecha Kedusha. I don't know any of us who ever do a Hecha Kedusha for Shachris. It's always Mincha. What he says is, lo yatchil ad achar she'amar Kedusha. He actually says that for Mincha, you're supposed to do what I said I didn't think was the proper way, and wasn't what Soloveitchik says. You're supposed to let the Chazan do his thing, finish with Kedusha, and then you start. That's what the Ramah says to do, contrary to what I said before. That's what the Ramah, because before he was only speaking about Shachris before. That's what the Ramah says to do. Now, the other interesting thing, which if he says it explicitly here, that I'll read it to you. This is also in 124. He says that you daven, if you're going to daven together with the Chazan, like in Shachris, or according to Rav Soloveitchik's approach, I guess, You're supposed to, if you're going to be starting together with the Chazan, at least the Ramah says, you're supposed to read everything. That is, I think most people, when they start with the Chazan, they get to Kedusha, then they are silent, and then they respond to the Chazan. The Chazan says the Kadesh, and they respond. No, the Ramah says if you're doing it together with the Chazan, you have to say the Kedusha together with him. So when the Chazan says Nekadesh, you say Nekadesh. When he says Kadosh, you say Kadosh. That is not the practice at the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. Spanish and Portuguese synagogue, you start together with the Chazan and you say the Kedusha responsively. I don't know what the Rav's position is. I'm assuming the Rav held, like the Ramah says, that you do the Kedusha together with the Chazan. But here is something that, as far as I know, I've never seen done by people who say it together with the Chazan, unless it was just me who missed it. But that's the Heicha Kedusha. Okay, my friends, we are now picking up. We are picking up the end of the Sefer Ego Divrei Abris. We're picking up with Rav Moshe Sofer, Rav Moshe Schreiber, the Chatam Sofer, Chatam Sofer, as I call it, Ashkenazic. His name, Schreiber, means Sofer, writer. The pronunciation is of interest. We spoke not in this semester, but if you go back a few semesters ago, at the hotel that I was at, I gave a talk on the book I published, and I said that I gave 53 classes on it. So this is only one class. I actually did it last year too. So I said I could do 2 classes. But those who are with us know that we spoke a lot about dikduk and grammatical things. Some of you listening right now are quite adept at these areas of dikduk. I'm looking at some of you right now, and I see you're the ones who I know are very interested. Well, there's a tzeirei under the pay. So when we speak about a scribe, we don't say sofer. Maybe modern Hebrew you do. Well, we say sofer. Actually, you'd say sofer in modern Hebrew because they don't distinguish a tzeirei from a segel. I just mention this because the claim has been made. There's a lot of evidence that in medieval times, not just medieval, even post-medieval, Ashkenazim pronounce the tzeirei just like a segel. And that's the exact same way Sephardim pronounce it today, even though they must have had a different pronunciation because otherwise there wouldn't be 2 different vowels. And we know that Sephardim pronounce it the same. They don't distinguish. So this whole zecher doesn't work for them. It's just zecher. We distinguish it. But there is evidence that Ashkenazim also pronounced it the same. And the claim is made in a number of places. The one place that I know is in the Maskil Ben Yehuda Ben Zeib's in his book Talmud Lashon Ivri on page 24. He cites a number of examples of words, including the word sofer, in which he claims that these are remainders, I guess you could say, or vestiges of when Ashkenazim used to pronounce a tzeirei like a segel. So, for example, how do we say the word, the prophet's name? Do we say Eliyahu? No, we say Eliyahu. And he gives loads of examples, some of them which today that we don't pronounce it. We do pronounce, I think, like a tzeirei. He says we don't say netzachama, he says netzachama. I don't know, in my areas we say netzachama, but some of them still remain. The examples he gives, or do we say shochet? Yes, we say shochet. We don't say shochet. We don't say kolel, we say kolel. He gives the example of kofer, sofer, and he says names. Do we say yoel? No, we say yoel, Raphael, Michael. So he gives all these as an examples to make his point, which I think is dubious, that these are vestiges of the old Ashkenazic pronunciation of referring to things, tzeirei, as if it's a segel. I think for many of these, it's because the accent for Ashkenazim is on the first syllable. So therefore, that's why the last syllable is lessened. So you don't say sofer, you say sofer. If you say sofer, that'll be different. And he complicates matters because then he has to explain why certain words that have a segel are pronounced with a tzeirei, and he thinks this is all a mistake. But he gives some examples like the name Melech. What did they call it, Ashkenazi? Melech. Growing up, that's what they called me, Melech. And the holiday we just finished. What do Ashkenazim call it? Pesach. Now, you might think this is Yiddish. It's not Yiddish. That's an Ashkenazic pronunciation of Eastern Europe for Pesach. My kids hate it because they're all Pesach, Pesach, which I guess is how it should be pronounced. But if you traditionally say Pesach, Salem, not Salem, you refer to the image of Jesus. You call it Salem. And Cheder, where do the kids study? They study in a Cheder? No, they study in a Cheder. But again, this has to do with... well, I'm not sure why, because you have plenty of words that begin with a segol, and they're segolites, so the accent's on the first syllable, and they're not lengthened to traditional Ashkenazic land. So I'm not sure, but I am certain that the reason why some of these, like we say Kislev, that's another one that Ben Zev says, we don't say Kislev. I think this has nothing to do with being a vestiges of the old pronunciation. I just think it's the way language is developed, especially, as I said, you put the accent on the first syllable. So I'm not going to refer to him as Ramosha Sofer, because no one refers to him. His name is Sofer. You don't even put the accent on the last part, because he himself pronounced, and his family always pronounced it with the accent on the first part. So there is one more letter which we need to see in the book Ego Divrei Abris. It's the third letter of the Chatam Sofer in the book, and maybe the most interesting of the letters. And this ends the book, really. But as you can see, it's from the Rav Hagon of Pressburg. We know what Pressburg is. Today, Bratislava, capital of Slovakia. For most of history, it was part of Hungary, and then later part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Why this letter is so significant? Because in this letter includes a letter of retraction from Aron Chorin. Everything we saw that Aron Chorin says, he was forced to retract. His retraction doesn't last very long, but let's see what Aron Chorin says. Let me just summarize for you what he says. Well, even in the heading there, it says that in this letter, it says Aron Chorin retracted everything he said. Uvitel divrei tshuvas kinas emes. Anit pas besefer ha'aven nogat tzedek. Umidaraisa bittul be'almasagi. That's a nice malitza. From the Torah, all you need is bittul. That's referring to Pesach, which is finished. If you do bittul, you don't need bedika. That's the old question, the famous question. Then why do we do bedika if we have bittul? So it's a nice malitza there. In other words, if Aron Chorin has been mevatel what he says, then that's enough. And normally when the rabbi would be mevatel his opinion, then we don't have to remind him of the terrible thing he did. He did tshuva. So this is what this letter is about. And the Ramosha Sofer says, he says, I'm writing to you and I'm sending you the letter that the Gaon of, it's at the bottom here, Oivin Yashon. Oivin Yashon is often Alt-Offen. That's Budapest was divided into 3 areas, and that's one of the areas. You have Abuda, and his name was Ramosha Mintz. He was caught in a problem earlier. He actually wrote in his volume. He has a letter, a very respectful letter to Aron Chorin. So he says, "I'm sending you the letter that Rabbi Moshe Mintz wrote to Aron Chorin, and the letter of reply." That Aron Chorin wrote back to him. And this is his reply. It includes his reply, which is a haskama. Aron Chorin writes a letter agreeing with what the Hamburg Beis-Din says, that everything the Hamburg Beis-Din says, that you can't change nosach, everything I said you could do, I'm now mevatel it. The only way you can change anything about the nusach of tefillah, agrees the Torah, the ha-Torah, and any minhagim is only if all the great sages come together. And then he says, he enlarges it, no person can join together with these reformers. And then Chorin has a nice malitza. It says, he says the Beit Din made this ruling in Hamburg, and then they repeated it again the second time. And he says, Gam Rabbanan Amru B'Kfeila. L'haskim odapam al kol divrayim hanemri be'emet. That's another malitza. Those who are Yeridea know what this malitza is. What it means here is the rabbi said that a second time that everyone has to agree with this decision. But this word kefela, it also means with a kuf. It also means that you can give to a non-Jewish cook to taste something, an expert, and he can tell you if what the taste is, and we don't rely on it, but if there's a taste of treif in it, then Sephardim, I think, still hold, at least technically, you can rely on the non-Jewish taster. Ashkenazim don't. So that's a nice malitza. And then it says, the Chatam Sofer says, this should not be in quotes. And since the Sar HaMaskim in the Sefer Nogad Tzedek has retracted what he said, therefore, okay, so that's significant. Notice the Chatam Sofer calls him Sar HaMaskim, not Sin Reish, but Samech Reish. That's a play on the expression like Sar min haderech, to go astray, and it's Hamaskim. This is a double. This is a play on. It's a double malitza because the original phrase is Sar Hamashkim with a sin and the shin, and there's two sins. Sar Hamashkim, a shin, as in the one I think we should translate it as the butler. Sar Hamashkim, and then that becomes in rabbinic literature Sar Hamaskim with a sin on the Sar. And now he doesn't even want to say Sar with a sin. He calls him Sar with a Samech. The Chatam Sofer clearly did not believe that Aron Chorin was to be trusted. So he still calls him the Sar with a Samech, that is Sar min haderech, to go off the path. And he will, Chatam Sofer, Chacham Adaf Navi, that sages tell us that a wise man's even greater than a prophet, because the Chatam Sofer suspected Aron Chorin, and he suspected him correctly, as we will see. And then finally, the last paragraph here of Chorin's letter, he says, and now I've heard that they've also messed around with the brachos and they've taken things out of the tefillah. It's impossible to believe he didn't know this. But and he says, I've heard that they don't daven to kibbutz goliot. And this emuna is, this belief is basic to the Torah. And they're changing the nusach of tefillah. And I say about myself that I made a mistake. And therefore, I say publicly everything I wrote, and I will. Then he says, I will not rule anymore halachically. That's actually, we have a copy of this letter that also appears in the Chatam Sofer. That's not what he says. In the actual letter, it says, I will not rule chutz le'iri. In other words, I won't give any rulings outside of my city. That's what he said. I'm not going to give rulings to anyone else. But here maybe this was a printer's error, or maybe they put it in intentionally. I mean, they took it out so they have Chorin saying, I'm not going to paskin at all, which of course is impossible because he's the Rav of a city. He has to paskin all the time for his city. And so ends the letter. Rav Moshe Sofer signs it there. Hakatan, Moshe Sofer, me Frankfurt to mine. Although he left Frankfurt as a youth, for his entire life, he always refers to himself as from Frankfurt, and I keep calling him the Chatam Sofer. That stands for Chidushe Toras Moshe, Chatam, Chidushe Toras Moshe, Sofer. And this so ends the important volume, Eile Divrei Habris, which is the Orthodox response to reform, the very first one. Although the Chatam Sofer has suspicions about Chorin, this would come to fruition. Chorin would return right after, well, I shouldn't say right after, but soon after writing this letter of retraction. He returns to his old ways. There's another rabbinic expression that speaks about how, like a dog returning to his vomit. That's the expression they use about in, say, cases like this. Well, I don't like that expression, but it's not really Lashon Nakiya, but that's the expression they use. He would he would soon return to his old ways and become an even more radical reformer. Eventually, as we saw, he would, I think I mentioned it, he would curtail the 7 days of mourning, of Avelos, make it less. He permitted writing on Shabbos. He accepted in the end the decisions of the Brunswick Rabbinical Conference, which even permitted intermarriage. He stated that love of humanity and of God takes precedence over mitzvot aseh. Now, if you're going to say love of humanity takes precedence over mitzvot aseh, then basically you can get rid of every mitzvah there is, because love conquers all. I give an essay in my class. I do world religions, so one of the religions is Judaism. So of course we do the story with Ezra and the intermarriage, chasing out all the non-Jewish wives. And I give an essay to the students, asking them to discuss this and to talk about, that the traditional Judaism and some forms of Christianity oppose interfaith marriage. What arguments can be offered in favor and against interfaith marriage? And this is now going over 20 years. Almost every student, it doesn't matter your political persuasion, they see nothing wrong with interfaith marriage. And all the arguments that Chorin could give, how love should conquer all, etc. It's very hard to get this point across from the traditional standpoint. In the Orthodox literature of the time, Chorin is referred to as Acher. Elisha ben Avuya the great heretic, was referred to as Acher. You can read Milton Steinberg's nice biography. Well, not a biography. It's not a real biography. It's a novel about Acher, Elisha ben Avuya. Acher stands for Chorin. So Aron Chorin looks like Acher. So he was called Acher. The Chatam Sofer calls him Sitra Chorina. That's a play on Sitra Acher, the dark side. In the Kabbalistic literature, they speak about the other side, the demonic side, and that's Sitra Charina, the Acher. According to Abraham Berliner, the great German scholar, Chorin's descendants, some of the descendants in his lifetime converted to Christianity. And we've already seen that Gretz says that Lieberman converted to Christianity, although that's not so clear that Lieberman converted. But we don't have descendants of Chorin's, but there's descendants of of great rabbis who converted to Christianity as well. So I don't want to judge. I'm not going to judge him for that. Remember, the whole idea of reform, from their perspective, was precisely to save the Jewish people, and they were afraid that they were losing all these people who couldn't be Orthodox, and they wanted to keep them in the fold. It was a form of kiruv. Now, we've done the Chatam Sofer and tzeirei Brit. That's the first time he enters into this dispute and shows his leadership and really becomes the leader, and yet his most famous expression in dealing with reform is not found here. And those who know a bit about the Chatam Sofer are probably wondering, where is it? And what's his most famous pun? Hadash Asur min ha-Torah. And it's not, he hadn't yet thought of it. So it doesn't appear in tzeirei Brit. But once he does think of it, and we'll see right now where he thought of it, then that becomes his expression. And it's the I think it's the most famous maxim in Orthodox polemical literature, first used by the Chatam Sofer and then used by everyone. Hadash Asur min ha-Torah. Of course, it can't really be used the way it's stated, because first of all, this idea Chadash Asur min ha-Torah doesn't make any sense. There's always going to be new things, and if it's not in opposition to halacha, you could use it. And furthermore, chumras themselves are asur, and lots of people say Chadash Asur min ha-Torah. I have no problem adding in chumras. So from the Chatam Sofer standpoint and the polemicist, Chadash Asur min ha-Torah is used because after all, how do you say Chadash Asur min ha-Torah? The whole basis of rabbinic literature is chidush. Every great rabbi will have a chidush, will have new ideas. That was never thought to be excluded by use of this expression, Chadash Asur min ha-Torah. It just refers to liberal tendencies that the reformers wanted to do. Then you can pull out this phrase, which is only, as I said, it's a cute maxim, Chadash Asur min ha-Torah. But if one of the Gedolim believes in something Chadash, comes up with a new Chiddush, a halacha, a chumrah, or a kula, no one's going to say to a Gadol B'Yisrael, Chadash Asur min ha-Torah. It was never intended to mean that, and it was never intended on anything other than a way to attack the reformers, and it's a pun. He first uses it in 1819, which is when the same year that Divrei Bris is published, but the letters. So, for instance, the letter we just saw of the Chatam Sofer, I'll tell you the date of it, and all these letters are around 1819. This letter of Moshe Sofer is also, it's Beis Adar 1819, but he first uses also in a, you know what, he might have even used it. While we're on with you, I'm just going to pull it up actually, because I made a note here that he uses this in the tshuva in Yoredeya number 19, and it's also on 1819. So I'm going to look right now and see. Parshas Baz. So it's around the same time. I'm not going to say he used it afterwards, actually, because for whatever reason, he didn't use it in the other letters, but he does use it in a tshuva dated 1819, the same exact period as the Rebris. But here, he's using it to defend Jewish practices, or a Jewish practice that's lenient in the face of people challenging it from the standpoint of the Chumrah, saying you should be more machmir. And he is defending, he's trying to show that this practice, and as well as other practices, even though they're more lenient than you would like, they're still acceptable. Even if you could advance halachic arguments to say that we shouldn't be lenient here, the answer is this is our practice. And he says, Chadash Asur min ha-Torah. How does he, why does he say this? Because he wants to give an example of how lenient practices could still be valid, even though, and you're challenging me, I should be more stringent. No, that we're going to uphold our tradition, that this lenient practice. And he gives an example, namely the Achronim justify the people, there's a halacha that you can't eat chadash, grains that take root after, what is it, the 16th of Nisan, that in that year, you're forbidden to eat them from them until the following Pesach. So a lot of discussion. Why is it that we're not makpid? When I say we're not makpid, it's been hundreds of years that people haven't been makpid on this, and they've been eating what we call chadash. And there's many achronim who deal with this, who do the Bach, many others who give justification. The most famous justification is that the whole idea of chadash only and yashan only applies in the land of Israel, but there's other justifications. And he then goes on, the Chatam Sofer goes on and says that chadash, namely new ideas, innovations, are always forbidden. The expression is chadash asur min ha-Torah, meaning that chadash, the grains, are forbidden from the Torah. And the Chatam Sofer says chadash, innovations, are forbidden from the Torah. And the older it is, the better. So therefore, don't give me these chumras, these new chumras. I'll take the old practice. That's our minhag, because chadash, namely your newfangled stringency, that is chadash. And as we know, chadash asur min ha-Torah. So the first time he uses it is to defend a lenient practice. In particular, he mentions chadash, and he condemns stringencies that go against the minhag. Later, of course, he uses this pun to express his disapproval for all the reforms. And it works much better there, because then you're saying everything the reform are doing. They want to daven in the vernacular. They want to cut out prayers, change nuschot, everything they want to do, automatically it's forbidden. You don't need to give a halachic argument, just chadash asur min ha-Torah. Anything new is forbidden. But to show you to illustrate for you very vividly what I said, that it's not to be taken as anything more than a pun, his own son did not follow this. Ramosha Sofer, in his ethical will, he says, he gives a number of things that they can't do. That is, he's giving an ethical will to his son, the Chatam Sofer, Avram Shmuel Sofer, who's going to take over when Chatam Sofer passes away. And one of them is, he says, you should not have a German preacher. Chatam Sofer fought against this. This is what the reformers did. They wanted sermons in the vernacular. He says, do not have a German preacher, only have a preacher in Yiddish, just like we had in my day. Well, the Chatam Sofer takes over as the rabbi, and it's a new generation, and the younger generation, they're German speakers. And you can have a Yiddish preacher, and sermons were very significant in those days. They had a Maggid who preached on Shabbos and other times, and it would be in the afternoon. They come for an hour, you listen to it. If the younger people speak German, they're not going to come, then what do you accomplish by this? So none other than the Chatam Sofer gives approval to hire a German preacher, very pious rabbi, who then becomes, who's buried to this day in the Pressburg Cemetery, who becomes the preacher, was very successful. And the Chatam Sofer's point was, it's not what my father said, but what he would say if he was around today. It's like saying the Ridbaz says you can, Yaakov Dovlovsky, when he was in America, he said you can only have Yiddish preachers. And he says that if you're in a synagogue and someone gets up to preach in English, you should get up and walk out. And I've told you many times that my friend, he walks out for sermons and he always says, I hold by the Ritbaz. He doesn't know Yiddish himself, but it would make no sense in a community that doesn't, it only makes sense in a community where everyone knows Yiddish and they're doing preaching in the vernacular as a reform. But by the time of the Chatam Sofer, it wasn't a reform. That was the language they spoke. Needless to say, it's Hungary, so you always have extremists. And Rav Hillel Lichtenstein, who was also a student of the Chatam Sofer, but an extremist student, he attacks, he has a whole letter in which he attacks the Chatam Sofer, and the letter reads like, Echa, how was it that what used to be a great city, Pressburg, now is having a German preacher? It's a center of reform, he sees it, but it's not at all. Hadash Torah is only used for polemical purposes. What sense would it make not to hire the German preacher? That would be, as they say, cutting off your nose to spite your face. Is that the expression? The Chatam Sofer goes even further. He negotiated with Raziel Hildesheimer to come and be the second rabbi in Pressburg. The Chatam Sofer understood well that, forget about the preacher, you also needed a Rav. He wanted a Rav, a German-speaking Rav with a doctorate who could appeal, because Pressburg, they spoke German, they were modern Jews, the Orthodox. It was like a Germanic influenced area. This wasn't like where the Hasidim lived. And the Chatam Sofer thought it was very important to have a more modern rabbi. He would be the old time rabbi and there'd be a more modern rabbi. And he did not see this as violating from his father's ethical will, because he understood that times change. Yaakov Katz, those who want to learn more about this, because we're moving on now, soon we're moving on, he has a book that's devoted to, it's in Hebrew, but many essays are translated to English, in which he deals with the early reformers, many interesting things. And he makes a good point that there's a lack of correspondence, I think that's the best way to put it, between the intentions of the writers that we just seen today and in the previous classes in Ideological and the way they formulated matters. If you recall, they wanted to read the reformers out of Judaism entirely. This is a new sect. It's not real Judaism. On the other hand, as we saw, it wasn't very easy to offer a halachic justification for this. Playing an organ by a non-Jew on Shabbos, how are you going to answer that if we know that a non-Jew could play on Shabbos, as we've already seen? And we went through how the rabbis try to show the cases are different. The Chatam Sofer and others, they make the distinction that for a wedding, we have a concept of simcha, so therefore the non-Jew can play on Shabbos, but there's no concept of simcha in davening. But I think you all agree that it was stretching matters, because at the end of the day, this wasn't so much a halachic issue. That wasn't the problem. The problem was they all understood very well what the reformers were about, that they were about imitating the non-Jews and trying to, this is just the first step to tearing down traditional Judaism. Now, you could say that had the traditionalists used different arguments, maybe they would have stemmed the tide of reform, but I doubt it. Under the circumstances, I think it was clear where this was going. And the Chatam Sofer saw very clearly that these early reforms, that's what they were. They were the early reforms that were then going to lead inexorably to larger reforms. And he took a stand. And I think in the context of the time, this was the correct step to take. When it came to removing passages from the Siddur about return to Zion, there the poskim were on a more firm ground, because this clearly showed the ideology of the reformers, and that's breaking with basic principle of faith. The problem, however, is, again, how do you judge these reformers? What category? Are they apostates? Are they heretics? If you want to regard them as apostates, but they insist on being in the Jewish community. So how do you regard them as apostates? They didn't convert out. The closest parallel which the rabbis could find to judge these reformers, to put them in, was the Karaites, the example of the Karaites. That is, these are not apostates. They're not Spinoza types. Spinoza was a secular Jew. He was the first secular Jew, they say. He had nothing to do with the Jewish community. But these reformers, not only do they have a lot to do with it, they want to be part of it. They want to control it. So the closest parallel in Jewish history was Karaites, and was actually the Chatam Sofer, who himself compares the reformers to the Karaites, and therefore that gives you a source on how to judge them. Look how the rabbis in the past judged the Karaites, and then you can apply this judgment to the reformers. And in the Ashkenazic world, at least, marriage was forbidden between Karaites and Rabbinites. This is the Ramah says you cannot marry them. Now, in the Sephardic world, they're more liberal, and to this day, Sephardic rabbis will either convert or convert in quotes, Karaites. Actually, you don't need to, I mean, it has to be converted in quotes, because if they're not, if you say they're not Jewish, then, and you convert them, then there's no problem marrying them. But Chacham Avad Yosef, for when he was in Egypt and in Israel, brought many Karaites into the community. That is, all they had to do was accept Torah Shabbal Peh, and they became part of the community. Ashkenazi rabbis disagreed with this, because there's a tradition not to marry with them, because we assume that their marriages are okay, but they don't have gittin. But we don't need to get into that issue at the moment. Just remember the point that, and we're going to see it in a second, that the Karaites, namely people who are Jewish but are heretics. What are the Karaites? Why are they heretics? Well, they're heretics. They reject the Torah Shabbal Peh. So that's the exact parallel to the reformers. And the reformers are even worse, because they accept the Torah Shabbal Peh also. He first, before we get to that though, I want to show you something. There was a very traditional Italian rabbi in the city of Trieste. Trieste at this time today it's part of Italy, but it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It has a beautiful synagogue. I've never made it to Trieste. I've published documents from Trieste. I found at the JTS archives I wrote a whole piece one piece in the journal Or Yisrael. Or Yisrael is a nice Hasidic journal with lots of good stuff in it, published from New York, actually, at a Muncie, Rabbi Oberlander, a cousin of the Rabbi Oberlander from Budapest. And I discovered manuscript material about the Machokes, about etrogim from Corfu. If you come on, when we go to Greece, God willing, we'll go to Greece, not this summer, the summer after, and we go to Corfu. So we'll talk all about the etrogim in Corfu. And that's where the etrogim came from, the best etrogim. Everyone used the Corfu etrog. But then, first of all, there was anti-Semitism in Greece, so the rabbis wanted to put a cherem on it. But more than that, once they start planting etrogim in Eretz Yisrael, there's a mitzvah that we have to support Jews in Eretz Yisrael. You have Jews in Eretz Yisrael versus non-Jews in Greece. So many of the rabbis started putting cherems, bans on using the etrogs from Greece, as well as it was pointed out, but probably just by the opponents, the people who had their own esrogim, that they were more kovim. That is, these esrogim were mixed with lemons, because the truth is that all the esrogim had this chashash pretty much. In Israel, the standard esrogim in Israel also had this chashash. It was very difficult to have esrogim that didn't have this chashash. But I found among the documents was one by the rabbi of Trieste testifying to the kashrus of the esrogim. So I do want to get to Trieste. Maybe one day when I finish the Italy trip, if I don't have to get to another trip quickly, I'll go there, because I know people have gone. Lois Dubin has a whole book about what's it called, Jews in the Port City or something like that. Trieste was a very interesting city, which had significant rabbis. So one of them was an Italian rabbi, Avram Eliezer. I guess he had a last name, but he's not, doesn't mention the last name in the tshuva, as I recall. And he was well aware of the danger of the reformers, and he engaged in halacha correspondence with the Chatam Sofer, and the Chatam Sofer respected him greatly. And at the end of the Chatam Sofer's letter, this is in volume 6, number 89, look what the Chatam Sofer says. He says right here, if these reformers, if their judgment was in our hands, my opinion would be that we would remove them from our camp, and we would not, we would not marry them at all. complete separation, which is the exact thing that we did with the Karaites. They made the Ashkenazic rabbis made a decree, no marriage, no intermarriage with them. The Chatam Sofer says if we could, that's what we would do, so that people will not be led astray after them. And there would be their Eidah would be like, what it would be like? He says it would be like the Eidah of Sadok Ubaitus. That's we know the Sadducees and Botusians. That's already mentioned in the Talmud. Anan v'Shaul. Anan is he's regarded as the first Karaite, and Shaul is mentioned as Anan's son. Now we know nothing about him. He's only mentioned in Rav Avram ibn Daud's Seder Kabbalah, the history book. It mentions Shaul ibn Anan, but we don't know Shaul ben Anan. We don't know anything about him. But Anan is the early Karaites. In other words, we're going to Inhu b'dideyu, Ana b'didan, complete separation. And then he says, Koza nirali, this all appears to me, but only theoretically. Without the approval of the government, and without this, my words have no value. You can't, there were rules. You were not, politically, you couldn't do this. The government would take offense at this, and it was illegal to make a declaration putting a group of Jews in Cherem like this. The government would see this as undermining public order. So what the Chatam Sofer is saying is that if we could declare the Cherem, and then we definitely would, but since we can't because the government doesn't allow it, therefore my words have no practical meaning. But I think anyone reading this understands what the Chatam Sofer is saying, even though technically we can't actually make an official cherem against them like we did with the Karaites. You, pious Jews, should know, do not intermarry with these reformers. So what does that mean, do not intermarry? Don't make a shidduch. Don't let your son marry a girl from a reformed family, even if, now, does this mean even if she's going to become religious? I don't think so. If she becomes religious, she's not reformed. But you understand that there's many people who are not that observant, but they go to the traditional synagogue, and they might think it's okay to make a shidduch with a family of reformers who also are not so observant. Their levels of observant could be the same, but they just go to the Reform temple. And it's for people like that the Chatam Sofer is saying that we should completely separate it and have no connections. It would be perhaps today if you had, like, if the Sephardic world made a decree, no marriage with non-Orthodox Ashkenazi. Now, the Sephardim, many of them are not so religious themselves. So you might say that, but we all know that they have a great deal of respect for the rabbis in religion, even if they personally might not be so observant. So you'd have a cherem that they can't marry with the reformers, and it would be basically the equivalent of what the Chatam Sofer was saying here. And that's, as I said, that's the parallel he's drawing between, we're going to treat these reformers like we treat the Karaites. Obviously, today we don't do that. On the contrary, we try to be Makari of them. We try to bring them closer. But the whole idea of being Makari of the reformers wasn't the concept then. On the contrary, the concept is we want to move them out of our community completely separate. So if we can sum up what we've seen so far, well, actually, I don't need to sum it up. We've seen enough. I just a few more things I want to speak about. I don't think we're not going to get to this class before we move on even to a new generation reform. But we saw that the demands for reform begins really in the early 19th century. This was real reformist sentiments in line with the spirit of the times. I also called attention, however, to internal demands for change. I mentioned some of them. And the fact is that we do have examples of people wanting change even before the reform movement. I think I mentioned that. If not, I'll mention more as well. And this has nothing to do with fitting in with the wider society. So, for instance, one of the things the reformers spoke about was the necessity of proper pronunciation. That's why they went to the Sephardic pronunciation. They thought that was better. We have examples of this earlier on. Yaakov Emden, for instance, criticizes Chazanim who don't pronounce words properly. He also criticizes them who they turn the davening into a show, a concert. We know that the reformers opposed the piyutim. They wanted to get rid of it. Well, you have traditionalists in the pre-reform era who also opposed the piyutim. They opposed the piyutim because no one understands them. We have, and people start talking. The reformers instituted modern drashot, sermons, the way we think of it. They did not think that Talmudically oriented drashot were suitable for our time. Well, you have, forget about Rav Shamshon first, he had the same approach. We have even pre-reform, we have rabbis and others who thought that we have to do something with these Talmudic oriented drashot because no one understands it. We know that there were rabbis who opposed selling mitzvot in the shul. Reformers spoke about this, that everything would be sold. It's rare to see that today in our communities, but there are places. I saw this. I davened with Rav Yosef and his minyan, and at the Great Synagogue, when you walked in on the right, that's where he davened. Before Torah reading, they sold every aliyah. I had never seen that before because in our shuls, and this is how they used to do it in Ashkenazim also in many places, but it's thought to only on the simplest Torah we do now. It's thought to be undignified. After the guy gets the aliyah, you give him the card, let him make a donation. But it used to be they'd sell it. It's an auction in some places, not every place. But like I said, they did it with Rav Yosef's minyan. I'm sitting there, I remember thinking, this is like so inappropriate, I thought. But how could it be inappropriate? I'm sitting with the Gadol Hador and he's there and they're doing it. It's tzedakah. But the reformers wanted to get rid of it. Then there were many also not reformers who thought it messed up the davening, it interfered. We have, before the reformers, we know, forget about Italy, I'm talking about other places, that there were drashot in the vernacular. We know that the sermons were translated, the service was translated into vernacular for women. We mentioned that already. I gave examples of this in Salonika. The Chida also. In the 18th century, the Chida reports, this is in his travel log, Magal Hatov. He reports going in France, where there was a shul. He calls it a shul for women. I don't know if that means an actual building or a room for women, whatever it is. And the chazan would pray for them in the vernacular. And we saw that in Salonika as well. Rav Yosef Yospa of Frankfurt. He wrote Noach Atzon Yosef. In the early 18th century, he says as follows. Listen to this. I'll read it to you in the Hebrew and then translate it. And this is before there was any such thing as reform. Matov umana'im. How wonderful it is. Haminhag sharaiti noheg bin hasfaradim. The practice that I saw among the Sephardim, he would have seen it, let's say, had he gone to Hamburg or in Amsterdam. Sha'amei ha'aretz shebetocham mitpalim bilshon Hispania. That the ignorant, the Amei Haaretz, daven in Spanish. We saw that in Salonika as well. This is all the reformers were saying. Well, I shouldn't say it. The reformers are saying the whole minyan should be in the vernacular, but in the Sephardic lands, the minyan, in the Sephardic shul he's speaking about, let's say in Amsterdam or Salonika, the minyan was in Hebrew, but the others who didn't know Hebrew would either daven themselves in Spanish or they could have their own minyan in that, as we saw. So the case could have certainly been made for that. But once you get through with Ela Divrei Abrit, then you're never going to be able to have an organized group davening in the vernacular because that looks too reform. He says as follows. Again, this is Rav Yosef Yospa of Frankfurt. If I had the strength, I would have make a takana sha'amei ha'aretz hanashim, that is the ignorant and the women, yitpalu hatfiot b'shon shemivinim. They should daven in language they understand. This is what we saw the rabbis fighting against. That say it in Hebrew, even if you don't understand it. In those days, the women weren't educated. They didn't have schools for them. But sometimes we're accustomed to think that the men were educated. No, most men were complete ignoramuses. In yeshivas, you're indoctrinated with this idea that before World War II, everyone was a Talmud Chacham, and you go back 300-400 years, the carriage driver knew Shas and all these things. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Hamonam today, the masses we have today, are much more learned than the masses of 200-300 years ago. The masses of 200-300 years ago, most of them were out working and apprenticing at age 12 or something. They had like zero knowledge. Our people, our Hamonam in our communities make it Torah learning through 12th grade, and then many of them go off to Israel and they're studying Gemara. The typical person never looked at a Gemara. He was an Amoritz. Now, before we move on, however, and I'm going to take you to the next generation of reform, maybe next class, or if not that, the class after, it's important to look at one more letter of the Chatam Sofer. For in it, we're going to see an important model of how he believed we should deal with reforms. And his model becomes very popular. He adds a point in there which is subject to great dispute and still has repercussions. The point is, and we're going to see it inside, is can you, and it's actually not clear how to understand what he says, but as he's often understood, is that in dealing with liberalizing tendencies, it is okay to exaggerate, let me put it that way, the level of a prohibition, to make it seem worse than it actually is. Now, this is going to have all sorts of implications. So, for instance, when the YU Rosh Yeshiva years ago came out with a declaration that women's prayer groups are forbidden, does that mean, what does forbidden mean? Does forbidden mean it's halachically forbidden? In which case you have to show me a siman on the Shulchan Aruch. Or does forbidden mean, like of the Chatam Sofer's model of forbidden, that we think that this is going to destroy traditional Judaism and therefore we will say it's forbidden and we have the authority to say it's forbidden, even though technically there is no prohibition, but we have the authority by virtue of our standing as the great rabbis to declare something forbidden. And this is an issue that comes back again and again. We're going to see next class where the Chatam Sofer uses this. I'll talk about the implications of this and the dispute over can you raise the level of an Isser. And then already next class even, I might move you into, we're going to leave the first generation of reform, a generation that still is focused on halacha, and then we'll meet a whole new cast of characters, also very learned, but a completely different perspective. You know the names, Geiger, Holtheim, and some others. So let me mark where we are here, and so we can pick up right where we left off. As always, time flies when you're having fun. Let me see the comments and the questions here. Anyone who wants me to send them anything, as Shoshana, you asked, please email me, shapiro.m2@scranton.edu. Ovadia says, I thought it was no fermented beverages for the Nazir. No, he that's what he had, comes from his daughter-in-law. So we have to accept that. Otherwise, how's he gonna fulfill the mitzvah of Daled Kosos? Yes, Susanna, you might say it depends on Shachris or Musaf, or Mincha. I guess you could say also you're referring to the Hecha Kedusha, I'm assuming. But the issue is, let's say we do Hecha Kedusha sometimes on our summer trips. We're traveling, so we do the Hecha Kedusha. They're waiting for us for dinner. So we're going to daven Mincha before dinner, and then we daven Ma'ariv after dinner. We do the Hecha Kedusha. So now I'm thinking that if I'm going to follow what I've always done, which is the Rav's position, and where you do it together with the Chazan, and when you get to Kedusha, I'm going to have to start doing what I haven't been doing, namely do the Kedusha together with him. But really, according to the Ramah, you shouldn't do this. According to the Ramah, you should wait until the Chazan ends. You answer a regular Kedusha, and then you do it from the beginning. It's just another minute, so it's not a question of time. I don't know what the Ramah means. If it's a Shas Chak and time, I guess it's a minute. In a case like this, I don't know. Whatever you do, you're right. If you follow the Rav's position, you're right. If you follow the Ramah, you're right. So I guess it doesn't matter. And Rabbi Cohen points out that I gave you talks on the Nazir, not the Nazi here. Yes, Nazir, fascinating person. And as Shoshana points out, something that Rabbi Shudno has pointed out, that Dr. Faur was frustrated about his treatment in some Orthodox circles. We dealt with this in the Lieberman classes, and yeah, it's just an unfortunate situation. Susanna agrees with what I say, that when I said that people interested in Dikduk, that she's one of the ones I'm referring to, that we move the accent back, so therefore it in the front the syllable, it goes from the vocalization from a tzeirei to a segel. Well, Mel, you said it's hanetz, but let's say netzachama. We do say netzachama, but he's telling us in the 19th century they would say netzachama. But the other examples he gives, we definitely say sofer. We don't say sofer.
Netzachama is incorrect.
Netzachama, you're saying, is incorrect.
Yep, it's hanetzachama.
Oh, yeah, but you could say okay, but traditionally we've said netzachama. Is it
Mistake.
yeah.
Common, very common mistake.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you're right on that. Yeah. Okay, but still, that's what that's always used. So, and for our purposes now, it's not relevant whether it's right or wrong. It's just how they pronounced it. Now, Rabbi Shuna says that tzeirei male with a yud is an a sound. That's not what he's saying. And there's evidence that Sardim don't make that distinction. And there's evidence that among Ashkenazim as well, at least some Ashkenazim, they never distinguished between a tzeirei and a segel, even though clearly there must have been a distinction at some time. Just like Sardim don't distinguish between a patach and a kamatz. There has to be a distinction, though, because you have two separate vowels. Yes, thank you, Ruth. It comes from Mishlei. I forgot it came from Mishlei. And Milton Steinberg's like a driven leaf, as a driven leaf. Yes, wonderful, wonderful book. Danny says most Oberlanders in the Chatam Sofer tradition wear shadels, contra the Chatam Sofer's will. And there's other things. He gave a few other things in that in that will. Rabbi Shuna says he studied with Shlomo Schreiber at the famous Schreiber's bookstore, all the descendants of Chatam Sofer. Chatam Sofer has numerous descendants. Rabbi Seth Farber is a descendant, not all sorts of descendants. Danny asks, why might the Chatam Sofer have been more socially attuned than some other rabbis at the time? I just think that he's a genius. And if you read Yaakov Katz, when I say a genius, not just in Torah, but he had a sense. He understood what was going on, and that you can't read, let's say, Yaakov Katz's article on him, and then we have Maoz Kahana's great new book, From the Noda B'Yehuda to Chatam Sofer, without having such an admiration for his insight. That's what I have. That's the word I want to use, the insight. His understanding of the forces, he knew very well. We're going to see that he argues against tearing down the ghetto walls. And it's not because he's some crazy man or he's trying to fight progress or anything. He understands exactly what this is going to lead to, the assimilation. So as I said, you can't read Jacob Katz. Really wrote the very first article in the Chatam Sofer from, there's a whole book written before by Rabbi Katz, who's a PhD at YU, but really Yaakov Katz, to see, I think from the time he wrote his article, everyone can appreciate how sophisticated Rav Moshe Sofer was. And he was not opposed to secular studies. He gave his own children secular education, but he had distinguished between how it was taught. Rabbi Shuna says, Chavar always said that they were Sephardim, not Orthodox. There was no such thing as Orthodox. That is applying to Sephardim. Today, however, you do have an Orthodoxy developing among the Syrians, which is problematic. Thank you, Mel. The Port Jews in the Atlantic. Evelyn says she saw a Sephardic Ne'ilah in which every kibbutz was auctioned. Chaim says that on Monsey Trails buses, the Hasidim saw all the Elios on Monday and Thursday. But the National Council of Young Israel requires all branches to include a provision in the bylaws prohibiting any commercialization of davening, including selling aliyot and shenadar. I did not know that. Thank you very much. I had no idea that this was actually in the Young Israel movement was about modernizing Orthodoxy and getting rid of those aspects of it that people looked upon negatively as from the old country. They wanted to provide an orthodoxy for the young people. At the beginning, they didn't even want rabbis. They wanted it all to be lay service, just like kibbutz adati in Israel, because they thought the rabbis were all Yiddish-speaking Europeaners who didn't understand the modern world. But that's very interesting. Thank you. And privately, someone texts me that I'm going to show you this. That Chorin's family was in the news recently. So before we end, I'm just going to show you this. Let me quickly show you all this. Thank you for that. Boston Art Museum will return 17th century painting to the heirs of its pre-World War II owners. And yes, the Jewish businessman is Aron Chorin. And we're assuming that this is from the same Chorin. Well, if it is, then I should feel good, I guess, because he's Jewish. And we can say that not all the Chorins converted. Finally, just quickly end up my email address. I will write it right here in the chat so everyone can see it. And then you can copy it, and I will. And someone privately texts me that there is a Young Israel that definitely allows, selling of. Well, there it is. Jay Yellen, a Young Israel that allows. When you say allows shnadars, do you mean allows that making a public announcement, praising the people who donated?
Yes, public announcements of donations for
Okay,
Aliyah.
when would these be done?
Every Shabbos.
When you got an Aliyah, you said
When you get an Aliyah, yeah, they stop and ask you what you're giving. And,
and then they say Bavur Shanadar.
Correct.
Well, my shul has, they just read it. They say Bavur, that he will give tzedakah, because people don't usually give the amount. But if someone went up and said $250, I think the gabbai would probably say Bavur Shanadar $250. And finally, the last comment, Mel says that his shul in Edison, the Kibbudim, Rasov, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Simchas Torah. Growing up, what they would do is they would sell them before the high holidays. I'm not sure how they did that. I think that they didn't have the email in those days, but they put out the word if you wanted. And I don't think it was bidding. I think they put a price, and people would contact before Rosh Hashanah and say, I'll buy this, I'll buy that. And then it was just, they didn't actually do it during davening. So that's more dignified. You open up the ark. Today in my show, we don't do that. They just, they call you to do it. And then you're expected to give a donation later. Okay. And thank you for, there it is. H points out the Evil Encyclopedia article on Ferenc Chorin. So I'll check it out. Thank you. Thank you all. Rabbi Kelman.
Thank you. Yeah. There's a long history with the selling of aliyahs, and it's a big issue. When I became rabbi in Toronto, that the shul would sell aliyahs and all the Yom Tovim, and boy, did it bother me. And there was a big fight that I lost. And they would sell them mamash like before laning, they'd sit there for 10 minutes, and they didn't even make a lot of money. Like, okay, maybe they're going to make a lot of money, but they even so anyway. But yeah, of course, Young Israel wanted to be very modern. That was anyway. So okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll look forward to next week. So tomorrow, our two classes on Tuesday are starting next week, actually. Malkus Simkowitz, and at 2:00 in the afternoon, we'll be back. And then we're going to have Michelle Margolis Chesner, who is the librarian at Columbia University of the Jewish Studies Library. We'll be giving a series on Jewish books. So that'll be next Tuesday. But tomorrow we're not having any classes. And then on Wednesday, Marty Lukshin, after about a year hiatus, we'll be back at 11 a.m. And Rabbi Moshe Shulman will be starting a series on Midrash at 1 p.m. on Wednesday. So we'll have a doubleheader on Wednesday. Moshe Sokol will be back next Wednesday night, but not this Wednesday. Thursday, Parshat Shvu, and Friday morning, I'll be continuing my sort of a new semester, if you want to call it, on my class on the Siddur. We'll be starting Rabbi Shmuel Omer, and the time will be 9:35, I mentioned, because of my teaching schedule. So that's, and Menachem Liebtag will be back on Sunday at 11:15 with his series on the psalmist and the as exegetes. So that will be Sunday at 11:15, and we look forward to learning with you and seeing with you. And please invite a friend, and everybody back after the post-Pesach, hopefully have, like we said, everybody had a nice time, a beautiful time, a meaningful time. And we look forward to learning with you and seeing you, and everybody should have a Laila Tov, and we should hear good news and good things. Okay, Laila Tov, everybody. Thank you very much.
Laila Tov, Toda Rabba.
Bakasha. Okay.